Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 96, Meno 78c to D. Meno has just agreed that wanting good things is common to everyone, and because he has a competitive view of virtue, that whoever has virtue is better than other people, he has to agree that wanting good things is not part of virtue, since wanting good things is common to everyone. Socrates now turns to the second part of Meno's third answer about virtue. Ido amende kai tuto e alethes leges, isos garan iu legois. Let's see this as well, if you're saying something true, for perhaps you might be speaking well. Tagathaphes hoiont enai poritzestai, areten enai egoge. You claim that being able to acquire good things is virtue. I do indeed. Socrates is using a different expression for being able, but it's still the same idea. This second part of Meno's answer has more chance of being virtue in the competitive sense, because while all people may want good things, only the best people, in Meno's worldview, can actually acquire these good things. Agathadekeles uchi hoion hugieante kai Pluton, kai crucion lego, kai argyrion ktastai, kai timas en pole, kai archas. Don't you call things good, such as health and wealth, both gold, I say, and silver to acquire, and positions of authority in the city? For gold and silver, Meno uses the diminutive of chrysos and argyros, chrysion and argyrion, which in this context must refer not so much to the metal itself, but to the things made with gold and silver, particularly coinage. I've used the phrase positions of authority to translate two separate words here, which Meno clearly is using as one concept, namely timai, honors, or positions of honor, and archai, which are positions of authority together. The timai are high positions in the city, and archai can be any position of authority, but together they're high positions of authority in the city. Archai are closely connected to the verb Meno used in his second reply about virtue, to be able to control others, and he used the verb archein, which is from the same stem as archai. Socrates had suggested health and wealth, but Meno ignores health and elaborates on wealth, emphasizing the acquisition of gold and silver, to which he adds the high positions of authority in the city. Me al atta leges tagatha, eta toyauta, uk ala panta lego ta toyauta. Are you not saying that good are things other than such things? No, but I mean all such things. It sounds very much here as though Meno is restricting good things to the objects of the virtue of the man, according to Gorgias. The ability to rule other people is manifested in high positions, positions of authority, and the means to do that, which means money, namely gold and silver. Eien, chrysion de kai argyrion poridzestai arteestin, hos fesi menon, hotu megalu basileus patrikots xenos. Well then, to acquire gold and silver is virtue, as Meno claims, the hereditary guest friend of the great king. Since Meno doesn't contradict this, we may understand that Meno and his close relatives are xenoi, of the great king. The great king is the king of Persia, the Persian Empire. Some Persian kings, particularly Xerxes, had enormous influence in northern Greece, especially at the time of the Second Persian War in 480 BC. It would have been to the advantage of the Persian king to have Xenoi in the region, not because he needed to be protected by Greeks in their cities, because he had no protection in those cities. He's the Persian king, he came with an army, but it's good to have diplomatic ties with people in the area. This guest friendship is not of Meno's doing. He is a patrikos xenos. It's come down to him through the family, but referring to it here implies that he has some power through this connection, or at least he's proud of the connection because it appears to give him power. He must have talked about it already if Socrates knows that he is a patrikos xenos of the Persian king. This all sounds very innocent in the context, but Plato must have had an ulterior motive. Plato's contemporary readers would have known about Meno's betrayal of the Greek leaders near Babylon, which would encourage the readers to contrast the Meno of this dialogue with the Meno they have heard about from other sources just a few years later. We don't need to know Xenophon's life in order to understand this dialogue, just as we don't really need to understand Socrates' life in order to understand this dialogue. But Plato uses historical characters in order to push the reader in the right direction. We should use the historical side of the characters in the dialogue as hints. The essential character is a deigma, of a paradigma of an idea, with additional characteristics from a historical character. The dialogue is not an authentic historical discussion between historical figures. It is not a biography. Now that Socrates has basically confirmed that Meno is still thinking about the virtue of the man, and not about virtue in general, we might expect him to point this out, that again, he was asking for the one virtue in all virtues, all instances of virtue, and yet Meno is still talking about one particular type of virtue, the virtue of the man. Instead, Socrates returns to the other criticism which we have already had, that talking about particular actions, particular roles for particular types of people, because virtue isn't about the what, it is about the how. How is the action done? With justice, with sound-mindedness, with parts of virtue. Meno had already agreed to this, and he's even provided a list of various virtues. It's not as if Socrates is forcing this idea onto Meno, and yet Meno has reverted to giving an example of an activity. This is what we should learn about Meno's character. Not that he's the patrikos xenos of the king of Persia, but that he doesn't learn from the conversation. This is far more philosophically important, and it may be learned from the dialogue itself. This is not background biography about Meno. That is irrelevant. So this is how Socrates deals with the issue. Poteron prostithes tuto to poro o Menon, to dikaios kai hosios, e udensoi diafere, alakan adikos tis autaporidzetai, homoios su auta areten keles, udepu, O Socrates. Are you adding to this acquisition, Meno, justly and piously, or doesn't it matter to you? But even if someone acquired these things unjustly, nevertheless, you call these things virtue? Not at all, Socrates. Ala kakian, pantos depu, but vice? Absolutely. If something is done with virtue, then it's virtue. But if something is done without virtue, this shouldn't necessarily mean that it's done with vice, or that it is vice. There are many actions in the middle between virtue and vice. They are indifferent. But in a conversation like this, where Socrates is talking to someone like Meno, who's been educated by sophists, we always exclude the middle. Therefore, a lack of virtue immediately means that something is vicious. There is vice there. The word for vice is kakia, which is literally badness. The adjective bad is kakos, so we have kakos and kakia, but I prefer to translate kakia as vice because there is no opposite word agathia, goodness, from the adjective agathos, good. The opposite of kakia is arete, so we have virtue and vice. But kakia does imply that we're really dealing with goodness and badness. It's interesting to see that Meno himself strongly disagrees with the idea that the acquisition of good things without justice and without holiness is virtue. We already know that Meno is aware of these types of virtue because he's volunteered a list quite a long time ago now, including justice, sound-mindedness, courage, magnanimity, and he says many other virtues, as he would, because he likes to be generous in his answers. One he didn't mention is the one that Socrates now uses here together with justice, and that is holiness. And I don't know why in particular he's using this one. We saw holiness being used in the dialogue Euthyphro, and it really means respect for authority, whether the authority is parents or gods, that sort of thing. The main point here is that once again Socrates is adding two virtues to what Meno is calling virtue.